Hi, everybody. Thank you all for joining us. I am very excited today to interview Dr. Philip Ovadia. And Dr. Philip Ovadia was actually with us in Costa Rica. I missed you. I flew away the day before you flew in, but he was with us in Costa Rica filming Reverse TV series, which is the first TV show that's going to be mainstream that explores how a carnivore diet is capable of reversing chronic diseases. Hi and welcome, Dr. Ovadia.
Yeah, it's great to be here with you. Sorry we missed each other in Costa Rica, but great to finally connect and talk.
Awesome. So, Dr. Ovadia, can you give us a little bio about what brought you as a cardiologist to carnivore, which is a very wild ride?
Yeah, indeed, it is a little bit of a wild ride. And, both my personal and my professional life sort of intersected to get me to this point. So I have been a surgeon for 20 years now. And for much of that time, I was a very unhealthy heart surgeon. I had reached a point in 2015. I was morbidly obese. I was pre-diabetic, and I knew that I was going to end up on my own operating table, so to speak. I was going down the same path that so many of my patients had gone down. But I was at a loss. I really didn't know what to do because I had followed the advice that I had been taught to give my patients. I ate less, I moved more, I ate a low fat diet, I ate according to the food pyramid. And, it wasn't working for me and it wasn't working for my patients. Thankfully, in 2015, I started to come across some different information, and it really started for me. I was at a conference of heart surgeons, ironically enough, and Gary Taubes was the invited guest lecturer. And at that time, Gary had just written The Case Against Sugar. And prior to that, he had written Good Calories, Bad Calories, Why We Get Fat. And Gary spoke about the types of food that we eat being more important than the amount of food that we eat. And it was really the first time I had heard that concept. So I read Gary's books. I cut out sugar. I went low carb. I was able to ultimately lose, 100 pounds, reverse my pre-diabetes, and along the way, I discovered that, the disease that I had dedicated my career to treating, heart disease, I misunderstood the root cause of that disease. And that has led me down a different pathway to keep people off of my operating table now. I still work as a heart surgeon, and I'm blessed to be able to offer that to the people that need it. But I would much rather people stay off my operating table and not need the heart surgery in the first place. So, my personal, sort of dietary journey went down what I think is a pretty typical pathway of, low carb, keto. And then I discovered carnivore and I started that, 4 years ago. I had even more improvements going carnivore. And so I've been, maintaining a largely carnivorous diet for the past 4 years now.
Incredible. Congratulations on the weight loss. I mean, 100 pounds is huge. And the fact that you've been able to maintain it, what are the stats? 95% of people regain all the weight within the first year after ending the diet. So that's a huge accomplishment.
Exactly. And I think it's because, ultimately I came to focus not on the weight, but on the underlying metabolic health. And
Right.
that's, what I now understand and what I now help people to understand, that it's really not about the weight loss. It's about improving your metabolic health. And the
Yeah,
weight loss is a side effect of getting metabolically healthy.
very well put. How does that affect your job as a surgeon with the hospitals, where, with your patients?
Yeah, so I would say that I am a much better surgeon today than I was back then, and that's for a number of reasons. The benefits of being metabolically healthy allow me to have better stamina, better mental clarity, but more importantly, I think I can now address my patients in a holistic manner. I'm not just offering them the surgery. I'm helping them to understand that the surgery is to deal with the damage that has been done. But if we don't address the reason that the damage was done in the first place, ultimately, the surgery is not going to be successful. We know that people who have heart surgery end up needing more procedures on their heart down the line. And a lot of them, probably most of them, still end up dying of heart disease. Yes, it improves their life in the short term. Yes, it extends their life when used in the proper situations, but the surgery doesn't change the underlying problem. So now I can talk to them about that. I can educate them about the underlying problem, and I can offer them a solution. In the past, the advice that I would give would, the eat less, move more, and eat a low-fat diet, wasn't working. It didn't work. Now I truly understand the root cause of heart disease. I understand insulin resistance and metabolic health. And so I can help people to understand and correct that so that the surgery, is only part of the solution.
Do you get any pushback? Do they, like, from the hospital or anybody, your peers, do you get any pushback on recommending a carnivore diet?
Yeah, certainly I do, and the pushback usually is related to the concept that eating saturated fat is what led to heart disease in the first place.
Right.
And, it's unfortunate because we know that not to be true. In the leading societies, the American Heart Association and the US Dietary Guidelines have actually removed the limitations on dietary saturated fat. They have recognized, and the language used in the US Dietary Guidelines is that saturated fat is no longer considered a nutrient of concern for overconsumption. There have been a number of scientific meta-analyses, they're called, the conglomeration of multiple studies that show that saturated fat is not is not increasing the incidence of heart disease. But the diet heart hypothesis, the cholesterol paradigm, is still very strong. And to be clear, I don't say that cholesterol has nothing to do with heart disease. It's just not the primary driver of heart disease. And if you address the underlying root cause, if you address the insulin resistance and the metabolic health, then there may not be reason to be concerned about your cholesterol level. We have increasing evidence that an elevated LDL cholesterol in the face of good metabolic health and good insulin sensitivity is probably not something we need to be concerned about. But I want people to focus on metabolic health first and foremost, and cholesterol, sort of becomes a distraction from that. The mainstream view that we can only address the cholesterol and that will take care of the problem has clearly failed. We have been lowering people's cholesterol, whether by dietary means or pharmacologic means now, for 40 plus years, and we are not seeing a noticeable impact on the incidence of heart disease. Heart disease remains the #1 killer in the United States and worldwide. So I believe that's why we need to step back and start, asking better questions.
Yeah.
And recognizing that we need to address the root cause of heart disease, which is not cholesterol.
And since you mentioned cholesterol, I've looked at studies where they look at admitted patients who've just had a heart attack. So in one study, it showed that 50% of those patients had normal, or what is considered as low LDL, like not above the threshold that would justify using a statin. And another study showed similar findings, only it showed 75% of those patients having low and normal LDL levels. So when I mentioned that, this counter argument that I've been hearing lately, especially on YouTube doctors, where they'll do a whole YouTube video debunking that, saying that, oh, it's just the acute phase response when you're stressed out, like you just had a heart attack. It's a normal reaction for your cholesterol levels to drop. And so like those studies mean nothing, even though, the authors of those studies they didn't come to the exact same conclusion. So what would you say about that?
Yeah, so that sort of logic to try and debunk this, is really not supported, and there are a couple of reasons. There are a couple of holes in that argument. The first thing is that the findings around cholesterol levels at the time of a heart attack are inconsistent. There have been some studies that show that it drops. There are other studies that show that it doesn't change at all. And we have additional studies that look at cholesterol levels 3 months, prior to the heart attack. And again, we see very little difference, very little, if any, difference between, groups of patients that have heart attacks and their, the control group, as it's called, they're the non-heart attack, matched patients. I consistently see patients ending up on my operating table who have had low cholesterol for a long time. A lot of them are on medications to lower their cholesterol. Some of them are not. They just have naturally low LDL or total cholesterol levels, and they still end up on my operating table. The problem with LDL cholesterol is when you only look at the amount of LDL cholesterol, which is what the standard blood test measures, you're not looking at the quality of the LDL cholesterol. And clearly, there are LDL cholesterol particles that are harmful, and there are LDL cholesterol particles that are not harmful. And we can use advanced lipid testing to measure that, and we probably should be doing that more. But again, the quality of your cholesterol particles is a reflection of your metabolic health. It's a reflection of your insulin resistance. So I would rather focus on the root cause, on the insulin resistance. But that's more complex than the healthcare system wants to pay attention to, and that many doctors understand or have the time, to pay attention to it in that detail. It's much easier, and quite frankly, the healthcare system, which includes the pharmaceutical industries, is much happier to have doctors just looking at one number and putting some arbitrary limit on that and saying, if it's higher than this, you need a medication, and if it if it's lower than this, you're okay. And on a population level, that works a little bit. It doesn't work great, but it works a little bit. But on the individual level, it really doesn't help people, because I see people with low LDL cholesterol levels all the time that end up on my operating table.
Wow. So you've mentioned this a couple of times already. What is the cause of heart disease? Would you say it's insulin resistance?
Yeah, it clearly is insulin resistance. And again, we have the data on this. You can go back to the work of Dr. Reaven, Dr. Gerald Reaven, in the 1970s. And, he basically showed that if you evaluate people in the right way, almost every patient that comes in with a heart attack has insulin resistance. We don't get even close to evaluating patients in the proper way for that. So we don't, we've kind of lost that. We've forgotten that, but his work is very clear, and it's consistently shown throughout the studies. When you go through the studies that compare head to head risk associated with elevated cholesterol levels versus insulin resistance, every one of the studies shows that insulin resistance is a much more significant risk factor for the development of heart disease. But we don't have an easy way to address insulin resistance. So, what I find is that the healthcare system and my physician colleagues largely, kind of put their head in the sand and just focus on what's easy, which is the LDL cholesterol level. But I am not satisfied with the results that is getting. And I want to do better for my patients. And I hope that more and more of my fellow physicians are waking up to this fact and recognizing the same.
Yeah. I hope. I still feel like we're the minority, but I'm definitely hopeful. I do feel like the carnivore community is growing, but we're
Yep.
definitely still in the minority as it stands. And since you're mentioning that, I remember that I had this saved a study that showed that 73% of heart attack victims had blood glucose abnormalities, and this was published a long time ago. Let me see if I can just tell you exactly where it was. Oh no, that's gonna take too much time. I will link the article in the description box of this YouTube video so people can check that out. It would, I think that's huge. If we know that 75% of heart attack patients don't have elevated LDL, and then 73% of patients who get a heart attack have abnormalities in blood glucose levels. So like, what does that tell us, right? Exactly what we're talking about. It is not the cholesterol.
Yeah.
It is the insulin resistant. It is the too much carbohydrate in our diet. And you're right. The reason why the medical system doesn't want to deal with it is because it's hard to get compliance. And the reason it's hard to get compliance is because of the food addiction, which is a whole other thing that we can talk about if you want. Would you say that you've had a certain level of food addiction and then after the carnivore diet it's gone away? I feel like this is the easiest diet to eliminate those addictions.
No, I definitely would say I had food addiction, and the you're right. The carnivore diet is what has allowed me to overcome that. Even when I was doing, kind of very low carb, ketogenic diets, I still had the cravings, and it was still sort of a willpower issue. Once I completely eliminated carbohydrates, on a carnivore diet, I no longer have those cravings, and I can actually, moderate my intake. The few times that I do choose to eat some carbohydrates, it can be a little bit, and it doesn't
Right.
set off, kind of, I don't fall off the wagon like I used to for periods of time when I was doing, just a kind of low carb ketogenic diet. So I think food addiction is a very real component of this. And again, the food industry, doesn't. They know this. They have their food scientists that
Huh, yeah.
design these foods to be addictive, and they don't even really try and hide it. You think back to the potato chip commercials that say, I bet you can't eat just one.
Right.
Because they knew you couldn't eat just one. So it's not really a mystery. It's not, some, it's not something that we need to prove scientifically. It's obvious. And I think it's a very real problem. And I think that's why, ultimately what I come to is no matter which dietary strategy you decide on, the first thing that needs to happen for it to be successful is you need to eliminate processed food. We could probably have some arguments about, what happens after that, and, how much animal product versus how much plant product. But if you eliminate processed food, you're going to improve your metabolic health. And, so that's what I focus on with people first and foremost.
So right now, would you include on your diet, would you include fruits and honey? I know there are a lot of carnivores who will like if they're gonna have some carb, or do you just have any carb but just like in small amounts every once in a while and it's no longer triggering an addictive cycle?
Yeah, so I don't incorporate fruits or honey on any, on a regular basis. I mean, maybe every once in a while I'll have a handful of blueberries or something like that. I don't think, once you're metabolically healthy, I think we can tolerate small amounts of carbohydrates.
Mm.
Um, I don't think, and especially natural unprocessed carbohydrates like fruits and honey, I think are fine once you're metabolically healthy. But if you're not metabolically healthy, you cannot tolerate carbohydrates in any form. And, yes, it's not the fruits and the honey that got you there, but the fruits and the honey are going to keep you there if you're metabolically unhealthy.
Mm.
Once you're metabolically healthy, if you want to incorporate them, I don't have much issue with that. They're clearly not necessary. I don't incorporate them into my diet. But like I said, that's a small, that's a small piece of the argument to be had. Eliminate processed food first and foremost.
Yeah.
If you're metabolically unhealthy, you need to restrict carbohydrates as much as possible. That's sort of the bottom line. And then once you get metabolically healthy again, you probably have some more leeway. If you're active and you have a good amount of muscle mass, yeah, you can get away with it if you want to.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And in your opinion, what is the best marker to detect risk for heart disease?
Yeah, so if I had to pick one marker, I would say it's going to be your insulin level, your fasting insulin level.
Mm.
You want to know whether or not you're insulin resistant ultimately. And if you have a high fasting insulin level, then you're insulin resistant. So that's the one that I look at, that I think is most kind of important to look at. Now, that one marker doesn't tell you everything. There are lots of other things that I look at with my patients. And the other thing that I would mention is a coronary artery calcium scan, because a coronary artery calcium scan is going to show you whether or not you have the early stages of heart disease, or in some cases, it shows us people have very advanced heart disease that they didn't recognize, didn't know about. But a coronary artery calcium scan, I think, is an essential tool that I recommend for people as well.
And I'm assuming you need a prescription to get a CAT scan or the coronary artery calcium scan?
Yeah, you do need a doctor to prescribe it for you. In most cases, insurance won't pay for it, but it's very inexpensive. It's usually, I've seen them as cheap as $50 at the
Out of
high.
pocket? Wow.
Yeah, out of pocket. At the high end, maybe 300, but usually it's under $200 in most areas. And, I think that's a very worthwhile investment in your health to get the scan and to know, rather than trying to guess based on these blood metrics whether or not you're at risk for heart disease. Why not look for the disease that we're trying to manage? And the coronary artery calcium scan, I think, is the best way to do that.
Love it. Yeah, I thought so too, and that's why I just wanted to get confirmation on that. And there is a difference between apoB testing and cholesterol testing, right? Do you have any idea which would be better, or what's the difference between the two?
Yeah, so apoB is a more advanced way of measuring cholesterol, but honestly, apoB suffers from the same problem that the standard LDL cholesterol test does, in that it's looking at amounts of cholesterol. It's not looking at the quality of the cholesterol.
Right.
So ultimately, what I end up doing with a lot of my patients who are concerned about their cholesterol is we get the advanced testing to look at the quality of their cholesterol particles, look at the size of their particles. And that's a lot more informative than just looking at the amount of cholesterol that you have.
Right.
It gets very tricky figuring this out, because on a population level, if you have high cholesterol levels, you can assume that most of that cholesterol is going to be damaged cholesterol, because most of the people walking around today are insulin resistant. But if you're not insulin resistant, and you don't have damaged cholesterol particles, you don't have small, dense LDL cholesterol particles, then there's very little evidence. I would say there's no evidence really at this point that is harmful to your health. It's a very nuanced discussion, and it takes a physician who really knows this stuff to help you figure that out. And unfortunately, like I said, physicians today aren't properly educated to do that. They don't have the time to do that. The healthcare system just isn't interested in having them do that. It's much easier for the healthcare system to just say, look at one number, and if it's above X, you need a medication essentially. And that's, the healthcare system, the pharmaceutical influence of the healthcare system is very happy to have doctors not think more about this problem. But when you do start thinking more about the problem, and when you're a heart surgeon who is seeing patient after patient end up on your operating table with low cholesterol levels, I finally was awoken to that fact. I finally woke up and saw it. I admit for a long time I didn't think about it. But now that I have, now that I do, I can do a much better job of helping my patients to understand and to truly, manage and improve their disease.
So, since you mentioned the subfractions of the LDL particles, is there a difference between small dense LDLs and VLDLs? So I feel like sometimes we lump them together, but they're on the opposite spectrum. One is the tiny, one's tiny and one's big, right? Am I getting?
Yeah, so they are different. They are actually different, cholesterol particles that we're talking about there. Those two numbers will oftentimes track together. Again, they both reflect the influence of insulin resistance. So oftentimes they move in the same direction with each other, but they are different particles that we're looking at.
And what would be the test for people to find out the subfractions of their LDL so that they would
know? So it's usually
it's
usually going to be called an advanced lipid profile or an NMR, nuclear magnetic resonance lipid panel, or is the way that it's referred to. I encourage people to ask their doctors to check these. Now, again, recognize that your doctor may not know how to properly interpret that test. So that's a problem. You can actually in most places here in the United States, in most states in the United States, you can go online and you can order the test for yourself. An NMR test is going to be probably around $40 or $50 to get the test done. But you need someone to interpret it for you. You need a physician who knows what they're looking at to help you understand it. And that's where the problem is.
Wow. I had no idea it was this cheap. 40 to
Yeah, it's really not that expensive of a test. Expense isn't the barrier. Now, many physicians, like you, have the that it's an expensive test, so they won't order it, or they think that insurance won't cover it, so they won't order it.
Right.
But the reality is that they just don't know how to interpret it, and that's the reason that they don't order it. Wow. And so, find a physician who does understand that and can help you with that, and that is the way to be, more actively managing your disease or your potential for disease.
And you need a prescription from a doctor to be able to get it?
No, there's actually many there's many online sites you can use these days in the United States to order labs for yourself. There are 3 states that don't allow that: New York, New Jersey, and Rhode Island, I believe, are the 3 states. But in the other 47 states, you can actually go online and order your own lab testing. And like I said, most of it's actually very inexpensive. Most, like an insulin test, will cost you $8. It's a very inexpensive test.
Really?
But
wow.
Yeah, but like I said, the problem is then finding a physician who can help you understand all the information, put it together,
Right.
and figure out what you need to do for your health.
Right. It's the interpretation part. Do you know which companies offer the insulin test?
Yeah, I mean, so the online site that I tend to refer people to is called ownyourlabs.com, OWN yourlabs.com. And they have, like I said, very good pricing on all of this testing, and you can go there and you can have your blood work done. It's the reason I like that site in particular. It's run by Dave Feldman, who many people in the low carb community know, and the money from that site goes toward carbohydrate research. That's why I refer people to that site first. But there are actually lots of sites these days that you can just put into your web search, order your own labs, and you'll come up with a bunch of sites that you can use.
I'm gonna also mention spectracell.com. They're more expensive though, because from what I've seen, they offer a bunch of stuff along with the NMR. It's not just the lipid, the cholesterol subfractions. It's also homocysteine, CRP, HSCRP, all the stuff that you could potentially care about in addition to the subfractions of your cholesterol. And I think it's around $250 or $299. So it's definitely more expensive.
Yeah, that's for an average for the panel that I typically get for my patients, if they're using one of the self-pay sites, around $200 to $250 is what I see. And again, you don't have to be checking all of these tests all the time. Depending on what your results look like, once a year might be enough, maybe twice a year. If I'm really aggressive, if I'm working with a patient who's not metabolically healthy and we're actively making changes, I might be checking labs as often as every couple of months. But I'm also usually not checking that whole panel all the time.
Right.
And, when your physician does order it, oftentimes your insurance will cover it. For my patients, most of their lab work does end up getting covered by the insurance. Don't let that, what I want, people to understand is, your health is worth investing in. And that's another sort of, I think, problem that we have, the perception that, healthcare needs to be free, and, the healthcare system should take care of me for free. Understand that, you're going to get the results that everyone else is getting. If you want to do better than that, it's going to take some investment. You're going to need to invest your time, your effort, and your money to get better health these days. And I think that's a worthwhile investment.
On that note, I have a client who I'm working with for fertility reasons, putting her on a carnivore diet, and she's in Canada. And the fertility doctors she's seeing, because it's more of like a socialist kind of, you don't pay, you just go for free, but they get to choose which doctor is available. And it's horrific. It's like, how is that person even a doctor? How does that person even have an MD? It's so backwards in terms of what he's prescribing, or like the generic advice that he's giving, that it's completely useless. And you have to wait months to see him. So,
Yeah. And, I try not to blame my fellow physicians too much, because, most physicians are truly trapped within the medical system. We get educated a certain way, and, physicians are no longer independent. The vast majority of physicians are working for someone. And, they have their families to feed, and their lives to live. Just can't see outside the box that they're trapped in.
And they're very busy, right? They don't have
they're
the
very
time to do
busy.
research. Yeah.
Exactly. The healthcare system is overwhelmed taking care of sick people. And no one has the time, to step back and say, why do we have so many sick people to take care of? So I don't necessarily blame my fellow physicians, but more and more I encourage them to look around and see what's happening. because what's happening is not good for the patient and it's not good for the physician. And we see physicians getting more and more burnt out and more frustrated with the system. But, you know, I'm energized every time I go to a low carb medical conference. I was just at Low Carb Denver a couple of weeks ago, and the doctors there are, you know, are enthusiastic because we are helping people and we are changing the system and changing lives. And, you know, all of the great physicians that were with us down in Costa Rica reversed. You know, these are physicians who are energized, are passionate about what they do because, you know, we're seeing the results and we're actually helping our patients.
Yeah, it's like a completely different breed of human that becomes interested in this. And I think a lot of us come from a need to do the research because the conventional medical system has failed us. For me, it started with acne. I did Accutane twice. I did spironolactone for 2 years, birth control pills, antibiotics, you know, and that was the first time I realized I was 18 when the whole thing started. By the time I was 22, I went through the gamut of things and nothing helped. And that's when I started doing my own research and I, you know, understood about paleo from their keto and then carnivore. And so it was a very long journey. And so I can only imagine somebody who has tons of, like a medical school student who has tons of debt and then graduates and then is so busy, your time, everybody needs a little piece of your time, right? And so, and then you have a family. And so you almost stand no chance, you know, and then they don't even teach nutrition, right? Am I right? 80% of medical school systems don't teach nutrition to their MD students.
Well, you know, they all teach nutrition. They do it very superficially. You know, it's a very limited amount of time, and you know, it's more about understanding, you know, what a carbohydrate is and what a protein is and what a fat is and what happens to that in the body. And then it's, you know, usually, you know, the US dietary guidelines and the mainstream advice, you know, eat less, move more, eat a low fat diet. And we've really forgotten in medicine that food is at the root cause of most of our diseases. And again, this is not a new concept. You know, it's in the Hippocratic Oath, you know, going back thousands of years, that, you know, food is our medicine.
Food
We've
is
just
thy medicine. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. You know, we've just gotten so overwhelmed, like I said, taking care of sick people. And the overwhelming concept is that when you're sick, it's because you know, it's a deficiency of some medication or, you know, a deficiency of some procedure to fix that is just what our healthcare system has become focused on. And we forget that first and foremost, you know, most of our problems come from the food that we are eating.
Exactly. Before I ask you about the pharmaceutical company's involvement with the whole system and how it works, I forgot to ask you about triglycerides and HDL, because that's also, if anybody's watching this lecture, they need to know the basics. And so the triglycerides and the HDL ratio and why this is more important, right, than overall cholesterol levels.
Yeah, so you know, the triglycerides and the HDL cholesterol are two of the five markers of metabolic health that are used. You know, kind of the standard markers. So the other markers are your fasting blood glucose level, your blood pressure, and your waist circumference. The triglyceride to HDL ratio is important because it reflects. It's an indirect measure of your insulin sensitivity. You know, if that ratio is low, and when you're working in US units, very important that you need to be working in the US units, milligrams per deciliter for both of these numbers. If that ratio is under 1.5, you can be pretty sure that you are not insulin resistant. Now, I still prefer to do the advanced testing and actually figure out if you're insulin resistant or not. But, you know, it's kind of an easier way to figure it out. And for most people, you know, the lipid panel, the cholesterol panel, is part of the standard blood work that almost every doctor is going to get these days. You can at least look at that ratio and get some indication of your metabolic health.
Right. Almost everybody has those numbers laying around, so it's easy to check. Do you order high sensitivity CRP as a measure of inflammation to see if, you know?
Yes, I do. It is one of the standard tests that I order for my patients to measure kind of overall inflammation. And again, that's another indicator of insulin sensitivity. We end up at the same spot. There's lots of different ways to look at it. And you really do need to look at different things. There is not really one number that we can look at and figure out, and that's one of the fallacies, going back to the cholesterol thing is, the heart disease is a very complex process. To think that we can reduce it down to one number, that the LDL cholesterol is all that matters, is really, just, it's hard to understand at this point, how we got to that point. And why doctors accept that. If heart disease,
I have an idea why, but I'll let you probably.
Well, yeah, but if heart disease was that simple, then we would have taken care of heart disease long ago. Right. It's obviously not that simple, and we need to think more about it.
Right. So, I guess as a follow-up to what we're talking about, how much do you think the impact of the pharmaceutical companies, how much of a negative impact has it had on this whole system, specifically within cardiology?
Yeah, it's huge. I mean, when we look at the guidelines that most physicians are judged on, and we're literally graded on these things, and part of our reimbursement is tied to how well we follow guidelines these days.
Really?
And yep, and this always gets misconstrued. I don't want people to think that doctors prescribe these medications because they're getting paid to prescribe these medications. There is some indirect, that is indirectly true, but I truly don't think that that's most doctors' motivation for doing so. It's just emblematic.
So you're going out of business soon. I understand.
Yeah, well, yes. It's emblematic of the healthcare system, that the pharmaceutical industry has a large amount of influence on how these guidelines get written. And, one of the guidelines, our guidelines around heart disease are based on managing the LDL cholesterol level. And yes, there's some superficial mention in there about diet and lifestyle, but even that, if your cardiologist is going to talk to you about diet and lifestyle, they're probably going to talk to you about a low-fat diet, because again, their focus is on lowering LDL cholesterol. So they're going to tell you to use processed vegetable seed oils because they do lower your LDL cholesterol. Right. They just don't keep you from getting heart disease is the problem.
Right. And that's probably also because of the phytosterols, which are plant chemicals that are really self-defense molecules that the plant produces. And so the phytosterols in the vegetable oils or the seed oils block your body's ability to utilize LDL. That's how the plant is defending itself, by actually lowering your LDL. So it's not really a good thing for you to have it so low. And that's what people don't understand.
Exactly. But like I said, that's all that doctors hear. Understand that, I graduated medical school in 1998, and I never heard anything besides, cholesterol was the root cause of heart disease. It's only when, I went down my own journey, like we talked about earlier, and, I came across this information that was never taught to me in medical school, is not talked about, at the medical conferences, is not what my colleagues are talking about. But it's there. It's, the scientific evidence for this is all there. And now I see it every day in the patients that I help to improve their metabolic health. And it stops the progression of their heart disease. In some cases, it reverses some of their heart disease.
Wow.
That's not, you don't see the same effects from lowering people's cholesterol levels.
Have you ever seen a CAC score go back in numbers?
Yeah, I have seen CAC scores lower. And that's controversial, and many doctors say that can't happen, but I've seen it, and it does happen. But at a minimum, what we do consistently see is it stops getting worse, and that's probably good enough for most people. If you just stop it from getting any worse, they're probably going to be okay.
I really wanted to ask you this, since we were talking about the pharmaceutical companies, how much do you think they're influencing the continuing education credits, the CME, the continuing medical education credits?
Yeah, so when you go to the conferences, which is how a lot of doctors get their continuing education, the influence of the pharmaceutical companies is everywhere. They're sponsoring, they have, most of these medical conferences have the exhibit hall that's all pharmaceutical and medical device companies. The meals are sponsored, everything is sponsored. And most of our medical societies, the societies that doctors belong to, that are where we get our guidance from, are heavily influenced by pharmaceutical companies, heavily funded by pharmaceutical companies. Much of the research these days is funded by pharmaceutical companies. So it's going to that's natural. That's going to influence that, and we have to acknowledge that. So it really becomes hard these days to find science that is not influenced by the pharmaceutical companies. And when studies get published, it's very hard to determine whether this is a study that you can actually trust. And a lot of that is behind the scenes, and it doesn't necessarily get disclosed, but it's a problem. The food industry is a problem as well. We look at the U.S. dietary guidelines and the committee members that decide the U.S. dietary guidelines, and they are heavily influenced, heavily involved with the food industry. So that's a problem as well.
Oh, yeah.
Ultimately, my focus is on helping people to take back their health. That's what I want people to understand. That you can't rely on the healthcare system to do this for you. You can't rely on the government to do this for you.
Or the guidelines.
Yeah, the guidelines. And unfortunately, in many cases, you can't rely on your physician to do it for you. It is up to each one of us individually to take back control of our health and to seek out the information that's going to help us to do that, to hopefully connect with the physicians that are, going to help you to do that.
Agreed. And since you were talking about the funding, remember the study that I mentioned, the 75% of patients admitted to a hospital, right? That study actually was conducted by a researcher who works with Pfizer, and the conflicts of interest is all in with the pharmaceutical companies, which is why, even though the study's showing, hey, 75% of those people don't have high LDL cholesterol, but yet still they had a heart attack, the conclusion was we need to drop the LDL targets even more. And all of this, it's biased because they're one and the same almost, So anyway, I know that your time is up almost, right? We have to wrap it up. Do you have any last minute? I guess you did give us the advice. Do you have any additional advice for people?
Yeah, like I said, it's really about, each one of us individually taking back control of our health, and, don't accept that the only answer to your problems is a pharmaceutical, is a procedure. ask about, what is really causing my problem? What is the root cause of my problem? And
Yeah.
if the team that you're working with can't help you figure that out, find other people to work with that can help you figure it out.
Agreed, 100%. Every time I've listened to the guidelines in any way, shape, or form in any area of my life, you don't really get success there. So thank you so much, Dr. Ovadia. How can people find you and connect with you? And I know you are the author of a great book, so if you can also share a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure thing. So the book is called Stay Off My Operating Table, widely available at all the usual places, bestseller, award winning now. So I certainly encourage people to check that out. You can find me at ifixhearts.com is the website to start with. On social media, at Twitter, I'm at ifixhearts. That's where I'm most active. You can also find me over on Instagram at Ovadia Heart Health. Or just put my name in the search engine, you'll come across me these days.
I will make sure I list all your links in the description box below so people can find them very quickly. Thank you so much, Dr. Ovadia, for your time and sharing your wisdom with us. I had a fantastic full hour learning from you, and hopefully next time I'll meet you in one of those low carb conferences that we will meet in person.
Yes, I look forward to that.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Have a great evening, and we'll talk soon.
All right.
Bye, everyone.